Hey everyone, and welcome to Scouting Session, episode 20. I'm Jérôme Bérubé, and as always, I'm joined by Brad Allen. Hey Brad, how's it going?
Hey, Jerome, it's going good. It's going very good. This has been a busy week of action, huh? Like
Oh
it's
yeah,
yeah, it's heating up now. We're talking playoff games right through the end in the East, which is always exciting. And coming off one of the craziest trade deadlines ever. Like what's a crazier one than this one last decade?
yeah, it was pretty crazy. Pretty like the last few years, it was a bit of a letdown, I think, for me. But this year was pretty exciting. We had some pretty big trade. So this will be the topic of the episode this week. We're also gonna answer some question at the end, but we're gonna focus on the prospects that were dealt at the trade deadline. So we got a few names for you guys that we're gonna talk about. But before that, maybe Brad, we can quickly talk about some of the bigger trades that we saw. Usually, we don't get like those big trade, but I felt like seeing Rantanen getting traded again was probably like I mean, just actually the first time he got traded was a huge shocker. I think it was a Friday night, like around 9 p.m. And I was like, what? That was like one of the most shocking trade I think I can remember. And then him getting traded again to Dallas for Stankoven and, draft and other draft picks. That was a big um, it was a shocking one, I think, but I think we saw it coming because we kind of saw the fit in Carolina was not going to work for Rantanen. But to me, the big shocker was the Brad Marchand trade to Florida. Him teaming up with Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett. It's going to be really fun to watch them in the playoff. But and also the fact that Boston didn't get a whole lot from him. Like it's right now it's a second round pick. If they, I believe they go to the third round, it becomes a first round pick, but it's I think 2027 or 2028. So uh, if I'm a Bruins fans, I'm probably pretty pissed about that trade. I don't know. What was maybe your take on some of those big trade that we saw last week?
Well, the first thing I'll say about the Boston trade is they're finally retooling. It's happened in real time. It's finally happened. So we're going to talk about some of the talent they brought in here, leading towards some skill with Middlestat and Zellers and a couple others. But it's the end of an era because Brad Marchand is not just like a leader on the ice with that team. That like Brad Marchand does a whole lot of work behind the scenes, even with the prospects. He's very hands-on. Really, really, really important part of that team. So that basically changes the makeup of Boston permanently. It's going to be different forever now. So we lived in the era. We saw the Marchand era. We saw Boston's peak. And now it's going to be interesting to see how much they attempt to retool relative to rebuilding. So that's my first thought. The other thought is that the Mikko Rantanen situation, where he went from Colorado to Carolina, Carolina to Dallas, that's the craziest thing I've seen since McConaughey trying to fly through a black hole. Okay, like I've never. What in the world are we watching? Okay, I never thought in a million years he would be traded. When all those rumors got, I was like, "There's no chance." Then when he got traded, I was like, "Oh, the number must be legitimately crazy. Like he must want like 15 million." That was my thought process. Like wants to be the highest paid player. Coming in, he knows the cap's going up. Everybody knows, right? His agent knows. Everybody knows it's going up. So I was like, okay, from that perspective, maybe it's too much for Colorado to swallow. But the Carolina saga, like what? You do not trade for that player only to flip him. That is not a thing. So something got lost there in translation. There was miscommunication, probably from the top down. Like let's just call a spade. Something went on there. Now they did okay. Like Logan Stankoven is a heck of a prospect, or I shouldn't say prospect, a heck of a young player. He's going to do very well in Carolina, fits in with their mold and how they operate. And they got a lot of picks back, 2 firsts. They're going to be late, but so at least it's not all, a big loss, but like that's crazy. That is legitimately unbelievable to me. I don't think we'll see that for the next 5 to 10 years in hockey.
Yeah, and like it's interesting. Like they actually mentioned the last few days that there was like a legit trade offer with Toronto. They asked for Mitch Marner for Rantanen, and obviously Marner has the no trade clause, and then he says no, I'm not leaving. So it's very interesting, interesting stuff with the Hurricanes. Uh, you know, Nick Ass didn't want to play there anymore. He finally got dealt. They couldn't get Gunzel to sign with them last year. Then now Rantanen is didn't want to sign there too. So that's a tough break for them. And I feel like if I'm a player on the team, I'm pretty pissed after this trade deadline. You had Nick Cass on the team who was having a great year. You trade him for Rantanen. And then Rantanen goes, and then no disrespect to Stankoven, but he's not at our level right now. Like he's not a star at this point in his career. So anyway, that's pretty shocking, honestly. Like the Rantanen stuff and the Marchand stuff, and Boston. You have Patrice Bergeron. Now he retires. Then Marchand is gone. So Pasta is still there. But what's around him? I know they have won a few games since the Marchand trade, but they're gonna need to, like, I don't see them being a full rebuild team like let's say Buffalo has been for the past many many years for Buffalo. I don't see Boston doing that, but I think they're gonna retool. But they don't have a lot of prospect also coming, so that's gonna be an interesting off season for them to see what
You know
they're.
what is, Jerome? You make a really good point when you said that like they're probably not going to do a full rebuild because I couldn't grow facial hair when Buffalo made the playoffs. Okay, the last time Buffalo made the playoffs, I couldn't grow facial hair. It's been a while,
Yeah,
but because teams are terrified of it. Like if you can think that you're going to rebuild your whole team, look at New York Rangers. Do you remember when we were like, man, the Rangers are going to be stacked? Niels Lundqvist, Vitaly Krasov, Alexei Lafreniere, and we're like. But like you just don't know. Capo Caco. You don't know. And so you got to really believe in your scouting staff. And then even that you're still extremely worried. There's no guarantees in scouting. We know that better than most, right? So I
yeah,
think you bring up a really good point. I don't think most teams are willing to stomach it. It's 5-6 years of pain. And if you can't flip it after that 5-6 year mark, all the pressure, right?
yeah.
The pressure of the fan base coming. So
Well,
I'm I
there's
think
a
retweet in order.
there's one thing about a rebuild. You know when it starts, but you don't know when it ends. So
Very true.
you just need to ask Buffalo about that. And then I'll finish with that, and then we'll focus on the prospect that got dealt last week. But Nathan McKinnon had a fantastic quote last week talking about like them getting Brock Nelson, getting Charlie Coyle, and he's like, you can't win with young players. So you want to win, you need a lot of veterans on the team. Obviously, when Colorado won the cup, Nathan McKinnon was still pretty young, and he was their best player. With Landeskog and McCarr, there was like a young team, but I think in general, I think your team needs to be you need a lot of veterans on that team. So anyway, that was a great quote by McKinnon, and I feel like a lot of people in Buffalo saw that quote. They're like, "Yikes!" All right, let's move on, Brad. Quite a few trades and a few interesting prospects that got dealt. And speaking of Colorado, the first player we're gonna talk about that was dealt was Calum Ritchie in the Brock Nelson trade. So Ritchie actually started the year with the Avalanche, scored his first NHL goal at the start of the year. He's been in Oshawa since after he got sent down. Play for Canada at the U20. So what is the Islanders getting, Brad, with Calum Ritchie, who was the first round pick 2 years ago by the Avalanche?
Well, they're definitely hoping for a Nelson replacement. That's what they're hoping he can fill immediately into that top six center position long term, and control the middle, dominate the middle, use his playmaking to make his teammates better. He's an advanced 200-foot player. I'll say out of probably any prospect that was picked up, this is the safest bet. It's almost impossible to see how Cal Ritchie doesn't play at least a minimum of 12 to 15 years if he remains healthy. I will say I think he's a bit limited with his shooting ability, maybe even more so than we thought or suspected his initial draft season after watching him more. So I'm looking at him more as like a 15, 20 goal, 55-point guy. That's kind of how I evaluate him right now. Very good 3C, decent 2C, I think would be the upside. Obviously brings some secondary value, especially with the neutral zone and middle control. He can really control the neutral zone when he's playing up to his abilities. Very good off the puck, very good anticipatory instincts, good spatial awareness, excellent stretch playmaking, and processes play rapidly. So he's got the goods, but I wouldn't call him the most dynamic or flashy, scoring rush or anything like that. That's not what he's going to end up being. But they already have Barzal for the flash. So it's okay to get a bit of substance too. What about you, Jérôme?
Yeah, you look at Ritchie, and you look at you mentioned the playmaking. The playmaking is going to have to be really good for him to be a number 2 center, I think, because you look at goal scoring wise, scored 19, 24, 28 goals and 15 and 40 tweets this season. It doesn't really scream. It doesn't scream like he's going to be a 30-goal scorer.
Should we break it down?
Yeah, sure.
We can break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
The mechanics. So mechanically, if you were wondering what's missing, it's the ability to adjust and manipulate his shooting angle dynamically. So he shoots the puck fast, and he's good with identifying where to shoot. The problem is that it's easy for goalies to determine the trajectory of the shot because he's not very good at adjusting it in real time. So doesn't know how to use his length to manipulate the release point. Like if you look at Connor Bedard, Austin Matthews, the top of the top, that is their gift. Also not great at shooting to triangles because the handling is a little bit rigid at times. So that there's some execution errors with the handling through the triangles to try to mask his release point. And then, not great at adjusting his shot in tight. And the other thing I'll say is he is good at peeling off pressure and getting in the net. He does have that spatial awareness, but not the best backhand. We talk about Liam Greentree as a prospect, like an elite backhander, Henrik Zetterberg-esque. That's where Ritchie's, a bit more limited as well. So he can get into high danger areas, and it's just the execution rates with the scoring probably won't be there unless he can learn over time to adjust his shooting angle at a much higher rate than he currently does.
Yeah, and in the Brock Nelson trade, so he was part of that, and another prospect was part of that trade, and we're just talking about maybe Ritchie shooting skills, maybe lagging behind a bit. The guy you got that was part in that trade is William Dufour, going from the Islanders to the Avalanche, and he's well known for his shot. We saw him in junior. He was the Memorial Cup MVP back with the St. John Sea Dogs. He scored, I believe that year he scored 56 goals in junior, and then he was the MVP of the Mem Cup. He had a good first pro year with the Islanders, 20 plus goals in the American Hockey League. He got one NHL game that season, and his play ever since has just decreased every year. Like his production is just decreasing. So I think for him, that's a pretty good trade to get, I guess a second life in the with a new team. We know he's got the shot. Brad mentioned about Ritchie, something that he struggles with is, maybe changing his angles on his shot and variation on his shot. A bit of the opposite for Dufour. Although he does not have the rest of his game is nowhere near Ritchie, obviously. Skating has always been the big question mark next to his name ever since he played in junior. He played for 4 teams in a queue, which is always makes me laugh because he started with Wanner. He got traded in a big trade to Chicoutimi, then went to Drummondville in the Dawson Mercer trade. And I think he was part of the Noah Dobson trade in his first from going from Wanner to Chicoutimi. So anyway, so I think for him it's a good thing. Like it's obviously the Avalanche are a tough team to crack right now. So, but I think for him it's just to regain his confidence with a new AHL team. The Avalanche have had some success with players from the queue lately. Ivan is a nice find that they had undrafted. They also drafted a Russian last year that played in the queue in Victoriaville. 7th-round pick. He was a third-year eligible, and he got some NHL games this season. So another nice find for them. So I feel like they're gonna give Dufour a lot of chance to, find his game with the Colorado Eagles in the American Hockey League. So I'm interesting. I'm intrigued by what this version of Dufour is going to look like with the Colorado AHL team. So, Brad, do you want to add anything on William Dufour?
Sure. Yeah. The last decade of tracking basically every goal scorer prospect in the sport, he has one of the strangest seasons ever. So that you mentioned the 56 goal season he had the most short side goals out of any scorer I've ever tracked. So for me, it was fascinating because, it's like, he can manipulate his hands, roll the puck over, present far side, shoot short side better than most players. He can identify seams on the short side when a goalie is integrated in his post. Those are good qualities, but it's like, can that really translate when you're going from the Q to the NHL? And we both know, Jérôme, how insanely different NHL goalies are relative to Q standard goalies. So that was the huge thing for me. It was like, can the goal scoring even translate? Because it's like he's a trick shooter, essentially, like a Daniel Sprong, Kent Johnson. Now, Kent Johnson's brought it back. He's dialed it back out of his game. But Daniel Sprong is like legitimately that style of shooter. Daniel Sprong loves to look for extremely low percentage seams that he can exploit because goalies don't expect him to actually shoot, and they're not set, and he catches them off guard. So that was part of his game. It is not translated fully yet. If that gets translated to the A correctly, then maybe we see development where he gets a cup of coffee and starts going with the Avs. And one other thing I'll say is, like, wasn't one of the major issues, Jérôme, his pace of play?
Yeah.
Coming out of Q2, right? That was part of it.
Pacing, skating, all like he's got some heavy. He's a bit heavy. So
that's perfect for my next point, which is when you see high-end dynamic scores that don't make it, one of the correlations that Jérôme and myself always see in these players, Arthur Kaliev 101, the pace of play is not there. You see a 50-goal score, but they don't have pace, good luck, because they need that pace to make sure that they get in the right position at the right time to actually use their shot. And it can be very difficult for certain snipers to translate it.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our next guy, and he's one of our favorite guys, and I think people in North America have learned to love him for his interviews this season. Nikita Grebenkin goes from Toronto to Philly in the Scott Lawton trade. That's a guy that we rank. I believe we had him 46. I was going to say in his draft year, but it was his second year of being eligible for the NHL draft. So I believe it was 2022. So yeah, we had him pretty high. He ended up being picked by Toronto in the 5th round, 4th or 5th. My memory is not as good as it used to be, but anyway, Grebenkin. I mean, I think I saw him a lot last few years, but I also saw him in training camp. So Montreal and Toronto at this quick training camp tournament for the rookies. I thought he was pretty good. And then, obviously everyone remembers his famous interview where he said, forecheck, back check, paycheck. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see him in Philly with Torts. It could either work like a charm or it could be a disaster. I don't know which one I'm going to choose, but he's a really interesting player. Obviously, we ranked him, pretty high in 2022 because of the playmaking was a thing we really like about him. The compete was there for him. Was uh, I think it's one big reason why Toronto loved him, and I think one big reason why Philly is tried to get him in a big trade for Scott Lawton is that that guy competes hard. So Brad, I'll let you talk about Grebenkin. You know you're a big fan, so what are Philly what are the Flyers getting with this player?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been watching him since the beginning, right? We were the only staff publicly that had him ranked, and we loved him because we were watching Danil Misyul, and Grebenkin would be flying through the neutral zone and going through three players. We're like, who in the heck is that? Where's that talent from? And it was Grebenkin. So my comparison for this player has always been an extremely weird one. It's a basketball reference. He literally plays like a point guard, old school point guard, Allen Iverson. What I mean by that is that he uses his edge work to manipulate the attack, the opposing defense's pivot base. When he flips them inside out, they take the wrong pivot, wrong direction. That's when he exploits them, uses his playmaking to his advantage. The huge thing with this player was the strength and conditioning aspect and the ability to fight through checks along the walls. He was very slippery, brilliant edges, but when he was getting pinned, he couldn't really do much because he was just so underdeveloped, even in his +1 season. So the bet that Toronto took and the bet we took when ranking him where we did was that if he could figure that out, if he could get way stronger, understand leverages, understand how to take contact correctly along the walls and work through checks, then he had a real chance of being an extremely dangerous top 9 possession driver down low. And the unique one because he's, as you mentioned, a primary playmaker, not a shooter. So I think he's had moderate success this season. I thought he'd be a little more dominant, to be honest with you, in terms of production in the AHL this year. He won the Rookie of the Year, right, in the KHL, Jérôme. And then I'm pretty sure he won it. So like he was pretty dominant. His growth rate has been phenomenal. Like his skating base has been improved, way better out of the gate. The strength increased, the physicality of him is just a totally different beast than when we're watching him in his draft season. So I really think this is a good pickup for Philly. I wish it was one Toronto didn't have to make from that regard, that, they got a diamond in the rough. Like he was a 5th round pick, incredibly difficult to get top 9 forwards in the 5th round. That's what he looks like he'll be. In terms of what you mentioned about with Torts, we could go through every Russian that Torts has ever had to coach and see if it really is a fit for him. But Grebenkin can back check. Grebenkin has the skating ability. Grebenkin's not dumb. If you can skate and you try to stay above the puck and you can anticipate play, like that's all Torts cares about it, really. Like if you do that, you're good. Grebenkin absolutely can do that. And he can fight through checks. I remember when Tortorella was Columbus head coach, he was losing his mind trying to develop Oliver Bjorkstrand, because Bjorkstrand always had this shot, the skill set, but he didn't know how to fight through checks. And that was like, it took him like 3-4 years to develop it. But once he did, he became the Bjorkstrand we all know. That will be what I think Torts can really help cement with Grebenkin, how to play the wall and board game properly to be able to exploit and take advantage of his down low playmaking ability. So I think it's actually a very good fit long term. I look forward to seeing it. I think he might actually make a lot of sense too with like a player like Matvei Michkov. I think it actually makes a lot of sense. So we'll see. But I like the pickup for Philly a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be in Torts good books, just block some shots, and he's gonna love you pretty quickly. So, and like we said, like that's a kid who competes. So again, if you play for Torts and you compete hard, usually you're gonna be in his good books. And obviously block some shots. All right, another player that Toronto traded, Fraser Minten to Boston in the Brandon Cardo trade. So Minten, I think his upside has been a bit overrated over the last few years, which happens often with Toronto prospect. People get, they overrate them a bit too much. But I still think that's a player that's gonna play. But he's more of a, I would say, depth player, fourth line, maybe third line center, smart. And Boston do, I mean, Boston, they do need some players. So I don't know. I don't think he's NHL ready. Maybe next year he would be, because he's pretty smart. But I think so far the American Hockey League, it's been a bit mixed, his play. So and even production wise, it's been a bit, maybe it has something to do with the Martys, because even Grebenkin, his production was not, amazing. Also, after being a pretty good KHL player for the last 2 years. So in Minten's case, I don't think offensively he's going to be a real factor at the NHL level, but he's got a lot of tools to become like a pretty good depth center. We don't know yet if it's going to be a third line center or a fourth line center, but I think he tracks towards being that, and being a good penalty killer as well. Brad, maybe a few words on Minten.
Well, they lost high character players in Carlo and Marchand. They needed a high character player to step in, and that's what Minten is. He's got character. He seems like a fantastic kid. Work rate's there. He's a very Boston Bruin style of player, isn't he, Jérôme? Like the way he works, he's gritty, he's determined, he's smart, and he's kind of limited upside. Like that's kind of they honestly love that player type, and you do need some to win. Like there's a reason they drafted Trent Frederick. There's a reason that where Trent Edmonton. There's a reason, and Carl. There's a reason Edmonton wanted Trent Frederick. Right, you need these types of depth players to win championships. So Fraser Minten comes in, and that's what he's expected to be, is a depth player with a secondary skill set that's very important come playoff time. He's a gritty, high peripheral player that can chip in secondary offense. I think, to Jerome's point, the ceilings may be slightly more limited than some people expect. This is not a Matthew Nyes or Easton Cowan situation for us, and we were very high on Matthew Nyes and Easton Cowan, and Grebenkin, for that matter. Grebenkin has a higher ceiling than Minten as well, I think. So that said, I think he's almost guaranteed to play in some role. Boston absolutely needs players to come in. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at Boston's center line. Zack is there. Middlestad came from Colorado. He's there. Lindholm, my goodness. First year of a 7-year deal. It's not looking so good for him and the Bruins. So maybe at some point, those three guys are all have contract at least for the next 2 years. So it's gonna be interesting, like how they're gonna bring Minten in the fall. Like maybe he starts on the fourth line and just start, moving, upward in the lineup. So anyway, the Bruins, they need some players. So we're gonna move on to the next guys. So two guys that were traded for each other in a big trade between San Jose and Ottawa. So that was the Zetterlund trade. So one guy going to Ottawa in that trade was Tristen Robins, a guy, unfortunately, we had him pretty high up in the 220 draft, and it's really not gonna work for us, I think. So Tristen Robins, Brad, I'll let you go on Robins, and what can the Ottawa fans expect out of him, mostly at the American Hockey League level at this point.
Well, I mean, what can they expect? To forget his name. He's not going to be joining Ottawa, so he's not making the NHL. We got it wrong, very wrong. From a scouting perspective, what did we learn from it? A whole lot. So I'm going to throw Brendan Brisson in this as well, since we're going to be talking about him. Like, you have to be very careful about seeing a talent that's well-rounded but lacks true specialization with like kind of an average toolkit. At the junior level, they can look a lot more like a legitimate pro than it's like a smoke and mirror effect, essentially. He kind of jumps like, well, if he gets a little bit faster and he gets a little bit more dynamic on the power play, right? You start just throwing a little bit of extra layers to the cake, right? Just hoping that it can come together. But the truth is, the NHL is specialized. And so players like Tristen Robins, players like Brendan Brisson are way more unlikely to play than you might think based off their initial draft season in junior. So we have to be, as a staff, since then, I believe with Brisson and Rob, we've been very careful. Like, I'm always screaming about specialization, as you know, Jérôme. So that's the big takeaway with Robins and Brisson. Now, Brisson, it's like, I really think it's more like the limited toolkit. Still not skating well. He was never a good skater in his draft year, never very pace oriented, not a high energy player. We just talked about it earlier with Arthur Kaliev and some of these snipers that missed. Brisson was a sniper. Brisson has a phenomenal wheelhouse, incredibly dangerous on the power play, not a dumb player, but the toolkit's lacking. You look at Tristen Robins, toolkit not that great either. And then there's consistency issues. That's the other thing that we should probably mention. In junior, they look extremely consistent because they can get away with everything because their toolkit's fine for junior. Once they hit pro, there has to be a completely different level of consistency and peak performances for them to actually translate. That's where we got crushed. So from a scouting perspective, anybody listening to this who does their own scouting or want to know why we got it wrong, that's why. And then obviously as a staff, we have to sit down and drink a gallon of hot pepper, ghost pepper sauce and cry our eyes out, because it's absolutely painful to miss at the level that we did with Tristen Robins and Brisson.
Yeah, and we were supposed to talk about Brendan Brisson later on, but maybe a quick. So that guy was in his draft year, came out of nowhere, was not supposed to be like this hot prospect, and then had a fantastic draft year. Move up on all the lists, but looking back, you're like, well, like, I can score, but like, what else does he do? Like, can he bring something else? If what happens if he gets to the pro level and he's not scoring as much? Like, what can he do? Can he kill a penalty? Can he play physical? Can his playmaking save him a bit? And answer to all those questions is no. So he goes from Vegas to New York, and there's not much more room for him in New York. So he's at this point where he just want to reestablish himself at the American Hockey League level. And I don't even think the Hartford team is going to make the AHL playoffs. So it's, see you next year, basically, for Brendan Brisson. And obviously the Rangers, they have other prospects that they're going to call up, before him. The Ottman, the Sikora. So we'll see next year, but it's not looking too good for him for the NHL. So back to that Zetterlund trade, the guy going to San Jose was Zack Ostapchuk, big power forward that has played in the NHL quite a few games so far. He was a second round pick by the Senators. We were not really on him in his draft year. Like, we didn't think he was gonna, matter at the end. I guess we were wrong. But he still remains a player with more of a, if he plays at the NHL level for a long time, it's mostly going to be a depth player, fourth line. He has some good physicality. He can fight at times. So that's probably the role. If you're a Sharks fan listening or watching this is pretty much what Ostapchuk can be at the NHL level. But don't expect much more than that out of him. Brad, a few words by you on Ostapchuk?
Sure. I think he is the carbon copy example of a player that gets over-evaluated by certain NHL staffs. Big, rangy, something you can mold, somebody that plays in straight lines, somebody who shows the ability to have at least some capacity to score off the rush. And Yeah, I think some NHL scouts can be susceptible to this player type. They can be a lot more limited than people think.
Mm.
And he's pretty limited. I mean, he's not a very efficient player. His handling rates are all over the map. He doesn't really know what he wants to be at times offensively, I feel like. So there is still a molding process to be had with him. If he's developed correctly, I still think he'll play, which means ultimately we were wrong. But how wrong? Not as wrong as Tristen Robins and Brendan Brisson, that's for sure. So I'm not too worried about him. I do think he is a cautionary tale. Like, he's another player type. Like, you know, it's funny, like online, like certain scouts they talk to us, I think they're more susceptible to Tristen Robin Brisson types failing, where NHL staff would be like, we don't want that. And then this player type is more NHL staff type, where it's like, oh, we want that. Give me that range and that size and the skating and north south and power game, and he's going to be great. And then he's not that great, you know.
Mm.
So it goes both ways a bit. But yeah, we'll see ultimately what he can become.
All right, next guy. That went from the New Jersey Devil to the Boston Bruins. Again, Boston Bruins reloading. Daniil Misyul, that big. Is he Russian or Belarusian, Brad?
He's both.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he played in Russia for many years, then came over, I think, last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, Brad, I know you had time for him in his draft year. So, what are the Boston Bruins getting with Misyul?
So he fits. We just talked about like how you have to look for specialization. That is exactly what he fits to be. So he is a shutdown specialist. He's an insulator, and he specializes in being able to swarm opposing players and basically take their time and space away as quickly as possible using his advanced skating and his range. Now, so a couple of players that fit this mold would be Isaiah George, Artem Grushnikov, Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, and this kid. Now, Jacob Romback in this class, another example of this player type. So shutdown specialists that actually matter, that can really help insulate a dynamic offensive defenseman so he can exploit his gifts. The reason I'm so bullish on this player is because his handling ability for this player type is extremely uncommon. If you put him up against Isaiah George, Artem Grushnikov, Jacob Romback, let's throw in Braden Pascal into the mix here. There's a couple others I'm forgetting, but he's the best in terms of his handling. Like, he can really handle a puck. That gives him a secondary skill that can really help deter off the forecheck. It gives him the opportunity to manipulate the first layer that's coming after him in ways that some of these other kids can't. Ultimately, I thought he would be what Elias Pettersson is currently for Vancouver. Like, Elias Pettersson's development has blown me out of the water. I am shell-shocked how good he's been. That is a massive miss by us, Jérôme. That's we take pride in getting these shutdown specialists figured out. We thought that the instincts with Elias Pettersson were a bit off. We didn't watch him enough either, though. These other kids we watched so much, we didn't watch enough of the Elias Pettersson. But I still think Daniil Misyul can be what Elias Pettersson is for Vancouver, just not as dominant defensively. And it's because he does have a very good skating base, but it's not elite. And then he does keep a good place of play, but it's not elite. And he does make life difficult, but not to the degree of some of these other kids that have this type of mold. So that's where I think there's a bit more limitation than I had expected. But I really think that this is a good pickup and a very underrated one for Boston long term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It's not like I watched him at the American Hockey League level, so I don't know. But I remember his draft year, like everything Brad said is accurate. Like, he's a big, mobile, with defensive value. My question mark with him, and sometimes they do figure this out as they get older. But I remember this decision making at times was questionable for me by him. So I don't know if he has figured that out, or maybe that's why he has not really move up to the NHL so far. So I do wonder about that. But he's a good athlete, and Boston will have some spot open at some point on the defense. And they also acquired another defenseman from Edmonton, Max Wanner. So that he's been in the American Hockey League for a few years now. He's a right D, so we all know NHL teams they never have enough right defensemen on their team. So Wanner might be like he's a low upside type of defenseman, but he does have some. I think he has a chance to be an NHL player at some point. But I mean, is he gonna be a big impact guy? No, but I think can he be a six, seven defenseman on a team at the NHL level? He's one of those low upside guys that has a chance. The Bruins don't have a lot of those guys also on their depth chart. Like we just mentioned Misyul. Wanner is in the same boat. I feel like Misyul has more potential than Wanner, but so we'll see. We'll see how they both fit in their new organization. Brad, what's your take on Max Wanner?
I really thought he was a fantastic 7th-round pick. I didn't see him in his initial draft season. I just knew Edmonton had drafted him. I was like, who is that? How do I not know who that is? So I watched him after they drafted him, and I was like, oh, they might have something. This kid's sneaky good. He was very good at manipulating the opposing forecheck with his off looks and his hesitation feints and just being deceptive, which is fantastic to have for a shutdown defenseman. That's you'll ask for that all day. So he can move pucks, and that there was enough secondary offense where it was like, okay, if this comes together, he might actually put up 15, 20 if things go really right. And then he was looking very good, I thought, last year in the AHL in my viewings, and then this year he crashed on the ground. He is not. His development's gone it's basically totally stagnated. That was the reason I think that they were willing to part with him. The other thing is you look at Isaiah George, elite skater. You look at Elias Pettersson, borderline elite skater. You look at Grushnikov, absolutely elite in terms of like how he pressurizes with his defense. Max Wanner, nothing elite. Their skating's fine, defense is fine, physicality's fine. Nothing there that would specialize. And that's where there's a real limitation there where I think it's more dangerous. So I was actually pretty high on this player as a third pairing insulator. My expectation has dropped on the floor. I think he's a work in progress at best. I definitely think Daniil Misyul is the more interesting upside specialist in terms of insulating.
All right, let's move on to the last prospect we're gonna mention. Herman Traff from New Jersey to Anaheim. That's an interesting pickup by Anaheim, I find. That's a player we had times for last year in the draft. He was not, I don't think he was really well known. Sometime when you're a late birthday in your draft year, sometimes you don't get as much exposure as the U18 player because they do have all those international tournaments. But Traff did pretty well at the U20 in Ottawa. Scored a few goals for Sweden. Could have had more ice time, to be honest. At the start of the tournament, I felt like he could have played a bit more. To me, he's an interesting player. New Jersey got him in the 3rd round, 91st overall, I believe. We had him ranked 56, so I think they got him in the same range as us. I do wonder like what Anaheim is thinking about his acquisition. Like they draft other players, like they draft in the 2nd round, 35th overall, Lucas Pettersson of HV71. I do wonder like what they're feeling about Traff versus him. Like, do they still view Pettersson ahead of him? But anyway, that's an interesting ad for them. My view of this player was a bit. He's got some Joel Armia to his game. Obviously, he's not as polished as Armia is with his play away from the puck, but I think maybe one day he can become that. Also, he does have flashes offensively that you're like, whoa, this guy could be, maybe not a top 6 player, but a top 9 forward because he's got great size. His skill level is really good. He can really shoot at pucks. He's got good hands. He protects the puck really well along the board. So if you want to cycle the puck, like he can be really useful for that. But there's a lot of inconsistency with him, which is kind of similar to Armia, and why Armia has not become that top 6 guys that people thought he would be. He has, find a niche in Montreal as a defensive forward, and maybe Traff becomes that type of player with Anaheim. So he's an interesting acquisition for them. Brad, maybe your thoughts on the Herman Traff.
Sure reference. Armored Titan for our anime fans out there. He plays like the Armored Titan. Armored Titan, for anyone who doesn't know, is it's an anime character that basically charges forward, goes north-south, and obliterates everything. That can be Herman Traff. He's probably like the highest upside power forward for us, like a depth power forward since Emil Heineman. Like, remember, we loved Emil Heineman. Like, that was one I'm proud to say we got right. We ranked him aggressively, really loved him in his draft year. I love Herman Traff. I remember you loving Herman Traff too. We were big fans of this kid. Beast of an athlete, incredibly athletically gifted. That's one of the separating qualities. Can make unique plays coming off the boards. That's one of the other things about this player. Reminds me a little bit, Jérôme, of Michael Nygaard coming off the walls, because he's athletically gifted, soft hands, can attack and manipulate defensemen on angles that they're not suspecting to be able to be manipulated on. That's one of the big things with this kid. He can drive at times and really force weighted minutes on opposing D. So there is a secondary element to him that really matters when he's not scoring. That is one of the reasons I really think he has an opportunity to play long term. I watched all of his goals and primary assists this season. I was pretty impressed. Like, I remember one of them I remember watching because I was scouting Michael Prodl, who's a Slovakian goalie that I'm interested in. He was playing him in an international tournament. One of the best goals he scored this year was against him. And I was like, oh, man, that's the real deal. Like, beautiful between the legs deke, timed it correctly, completely translatable to the NHL, like very fast release in tight. And I mentioned the in tight speed of the release in the hands because if you pull him back, he still has tremendous shot quality. So there's power play to upside, much like Emil Heineman. There's shot quality, much like Emil Heineman. He's a beast of a kid, much like Emil Heineman. He skates north-south like the wind, like Emil Heineman. So there is a lot, and tunnel vision. He is a bit limited in terms of his playmaking and his vision. So I think there's a lot of crossover there, even though they are different players. Heineman's definitely more aggressive. And I would say Traff is probably more athletic. But yeah, I think there's a whole lot there. I think the Ducks desperately needed this player because Jérôme, when I watch this team play, like, there's something going on. The energy to that team, nothing looks right to me. They need players that can step in and just play a big, heavy game and try to create some energy off the forecheck and attack and in transition. So that's what he brings. I think it's a fantastic pickup for Anaheim.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that we both compare him to two different players that are actually playing on the same line right now.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, so that will wrap up the first segment of the show where we discuss the prospect that got traded during the NHL Trade Deadline. So and we're gonna finish this episode with a few questions we have received from fans, from people on Twitter, YouTube. So I'm gonna read them. We got 3 questions that we got. So the first question is, name the top 3 prospect with the spatial awareness while playing with force. So we got this from on Twitter. Brad. So basically, the question is, who plays a smart physical game? I'm assuming he means draft eligible players, so we're gonna focus on that. So we just saw the question, so we're not gonna do a full rankings, but maybe we'll name a few guys that we think in this draft do have like this good spatial awareness while playing a physical game.
Okay, so that's a unique question. The way I'm taking this is he's asking which players who are physical can actually like time their physicality correctly.
Yeah,
based off of what's around them.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a good question because whoever asked it on Twitter, they're making a good point by stating that hit rates don't matter if the hit is not effective and not done at the right time. Right? You don't want to throw yourself out of the play. You want everything to be timed correctly. So based off of that, this is not a big, heavy hitting draft. Ironically, it's a very tall draft. There's a ton of players we've been watching 6'4" to 6'6", but not a ton of them are heavy hitters. So Jérôme, one we're watching a whole lot, trying to figure out. So Daniil Prokhorov out of Dynamo system. That is a player who's a menace. He's very, very strange player. But his spatial awareness, especially off the puck, is actually pretty darn good. And he can time his stick position and his physicality at a rate that is actually extremely surprising. One that was probably not as surprising, I'm sure some of you know already, Malcolm Spence. I feel Malcolm Spence fits this description extremely well. And we're going to go with one of the most underrated prospects in the draft. You heard it here. We've talked about him before, so I was going to say first, but the second time we brought him up. That's David Lewandowski. David Lewandowski is very good at timing his hitting and physicality. So I think those would be three of the major names. I'm sure there's more. What are you coming up with, Jérôme? Is there any off the top of your head that you can think?
Well, maybe I'll add two guys. Vaclav Nestrasil from Muskegon in the USHL. I would have not said that in September or October, but he has really had this physical aspect to his game now, which just now makes him even more interesting as a prospect. I'll say also Shane Van Sage from Michigan State, another one who's a pretty physical player. That he's pretty smart about it. Also, and his timing on his hits are pretty good as well. Yeah, maybe I would even say maybe Anton Frondel could be one. His physicality is pretty underrated.
That's a really good one. At the top, that's a good one.
He's built like a brick, and he doesn't chase hit. He just the hit comes to him, and he just once or twice per game. He's playing against men's. He's not playing against juniors. He's playing against men's in the second pro league in Sweden, and his physicality has really been impressive. It can be big hit on the forecheck. Sometimes he's just gonna reverse hit, and for people who know me, anybody who's good at doing reverse hits are really I love those players. So yeah, that's the first question. I hope that answers the question. Second question is thoughts on Chernyshov's season and what he could be at the NHL someday. Brad, I know you're a big Chernyshov guy, so he's been red hot since coming back from his injury. He's one of the shocking guy that dropped in the draft last season. There's Zeev Buum who dropped 12 or 11 to Minnesota. And Chernyshov not going in the first round was also a big shocker. What do you have on Chernyshov? I don't think much has changed as far as NHL projection, but I'll let you go on Chernyshov.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was my favorite player of the draft last year. I absolutely love this player. I like the write-up I did too. Some of my write-ups I botched. That one I thought was actually decent. So the thing with Chernyshov, listen, let's get out there in the public here. It's almost as crazy as the Mikko Rantanen trade to me. Like how does that fall into the second round? It's the $1 million question. I'll tell you this. I think the NHL has difficulty at times finding Russian scouts that they can trust. There's definitely a language barrier there.
Yeah.
And it's resulted in some teams having outright mandates against drafting Russians. Obviously, there's the war situation, which doesn't make things easy. But, I mean, there's tons of Russians in the NHL right now. And there are so many that are exploding onto the scene and thriving. So I was blown away that he fell to the second round. He's an easy top 15 pick in a redraft right now. I don't even think it's debatable. I think he's a monster. San Jose has something special. I think he's one of the best Russian prospects since Kromarchenko, in terms of like how the power game, how he's going to play, how he's going to operate. I think there's some similarities there. bit heavier set than Marchenko. Not doesn't have the 3-step area quickness Marchenko does, but there's some similarities. The kid has unbelievable potential because you can't contain him. He has too many options available to him. He's an incredibly cerebral player, but he can also play a power game. He can basically mold his game to any way he needs to and do it dynamically. And I always thought he was a very smart player, but now you see him come over to the O, and the time it's taken for him to adapt is literally like 3.5 seconds. So
I mean,
unbelievable. San Jose's got something on their hands. I've always said this since day one, doing this full time since 2017. You ever want to really be able to exploit a market, it's the Russian market. If you have a staff that understands Russia, you have a massive advantage. Then Igor Chernyshov's a perfect example of that.
I mean, it's nothing too surprising what he's doing at the OHL level. Like, yeah, you have to remember, like, he played half the season last year in the KHL and did, fairly well for the ice time he got. So this is nothing surprising, him doing really well at the OHL level. Like, you can make a case he should be in the American Hockey League right now, because he's that good. Obviously, last season the story before the draft about him was he got a big sunburn on the Florida beach before they had like that Russian combine in Florida. And like some people are actually saying like that's why he slipped to the second round.
I'll verify for you. I talked to their staff. That was the reason.
Yeah.
No, it's literally the reason. I was like, you're joking. Like, no, it's literally the reason he fell, which tells you what? It tells you that there's teams out there that just, I think they just don't have enough eyes in the buildings in Russia. They don't have enough eyes in the rinks. So they're waiting for certain tournaments to come to light. Like, everybody's desperate for the Russians to be able to play on smaller ice and be able to play with other countries, right? But it's not like there wasn't a massive sample, and it was a split season. You had him dominate in the MHL, and you had a half a year of him in the KHL. You knew exactly what you're going to get. I don't know, crazy.
All right. I mean, scouting is hard, Brad. Don't forget it.
It certainly is. Don't.
Okay, last question.
Tristen Robins, it hurts.
I know.
I need to go step right after this. It hurts.
Last question we got from YouTube. So, by the way, if anybody wants to send questions, you can send them on YouTube on the YouTube section, comment section. You can also ask them on Twitter to me or Hockey Prospect. Our Twitter is Scouting Service, and we'll get to them on the podcast at some point. So the last question. So it was I would like to hear a couple minutes about Chernyshev. Well, we're not going to do it because we're already talking about Chernyshev, but also Zeev, Bume, and Helenius, Buffalo first-round pick. So, like, let's be honest, we don't watch. Let's start with Helenius. We just saw him at the U20, but it's not like we spend a ton of time watching American Hockey League play. Like, that's not really. At some time we do, but it's not like, I'm not gonna lie, I have not watched Helenius play in American Hockey League this season. It's like my only viewing of him this season are from the U20, and I think it's the same for you, Brad. So the update there's not much change for us. Like, we think he's still a safe prospect down the middle. He's having a decent year with Rochester. I thought he was fine at the U20, didn't blow me away, and was pretty much the same story last year. I don't think that's a prospect that's going to blow people away. He's a solid, prospect that, maybe end up being a number 2 center at the NHL level. He's a bit undersized. He's not the fastest skater, but he's super smart. He competes hard. And he's got, good offensive tools, but not high-end, shooting skills or high-end playmaking. I think at this point, the projection is still a number 2 center, but again, like, we have not seen him at the AHL level. Maybe your opinion would be a bit different watching him with Rochester, but that's we have a lot of players to watch. So American Hockey League is really not it's not really a place where we're gonna watch a lot of of those guys. So maybe Brad, a few thoughts on Elenius.
Sure. I won't be shocked at all if he has a similar trajectory to Calum Ritchie. 50, 55 points, excellent third line center, maybe moves up a little bit depending on the scenario, depending on the team composition. The big thing with that pick is that there was a safety valve there. One, very likely to hit. Two, Buffalo is in trouble. They need players to match rate immediately so that they can get enough talent that they can start really chipping away at the playoffs. I think that was probably part of the thought process bringing him in, is that he's not that far away from playing. He's just such a mature player. Already was playing full-time in Liga, way stronger than his physical characteristics look on paper. Incredibly strong kid, almost like Pobasil this season, Jerome. It's almost like that, very similar in terms of like strength to size ratio, like extremely surprisingly powerful. But yeah, the offense is limited for much the same reasons Ritchie is. Not overly dynamic, not a very good shooter. He's just not. He's very intelligent, makes his teammates better, controls the middle, way more dominant physically than you'd expect, supports well, has a 200-foot game, mature, calm, poised, collected, all the good stuff. But the upside, yeah, maybe even it's a lower, it might be 40, 45. But to Jerome's point, like I'm in the AHL 80% of the time for goalie development. Simple as that. I'm not watching the unless there's a situation like Tristen Robins where it's like, oh, he stagnated. Are we doomed? And then you find out the truth, and again we cry on a pillow and move on.
Well, listen, if he's a 50-point guy playing on the third line center, I think I don't know what's going on because
let's say 40. We're going 40. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll see. And Zeev Buum, obviously we were really high on him last season. We had him rank. He was third. We had him third overall. We think he's a first pairing, potential D. We have seen a bit more out of him this season than maybe Elenius, but my last viewings were from the U20. Like he's he's really good, smart, super talented. I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but I think him and Brock Faber in Minnesota, that could be a spectacular pairing. Both are super smart, both move pucks. Like I don't know. I think they're gonna be fantastic together. And the good news for Minnesota is that they might see him play for the Wild in maybe a month or so, once an NCAA playoff are done. Depending where, if Denver goes all the way to season or not, they could see him sign right away with the Wild, a bit similar to Ryan Leonard with Washington. So that's pretty much a free player that they can add to their playoff roster. And I'm pretty pumped for that. Yeah, like nothing has changed for me for Buum. Like we're really high on him last season. We convinced that he was a better prospect than Levshunov, both playing at the college level in their draft year, which is not an easy thing to do. But for us, it was a pretty easy call to do, to put Buum over Levshunov for us. And he has not disappointed this season. I mean, he could have played pro hockey this season. Like he could have done really well at the AHL level. He decided to go to Denver for a second year. But anyway, he's going to be in the NHL arena pretty soon. Brad?
Yeah, I mean, we had him top three, so obviously we're pretty high on him. I will not be shocked if he takes a little bit of time in the same way that Denton Matejchuk has taken a bit of time to adapt to the NHL in Columbus. Brilliant offensive talent in some ways, but the skating can limit him when he has a mistimed gap or fails to recognize his time and space off the puck and gets driven and cut through in transition. That's been a bit of an issue with Matejchuk. Zeev Buum might have some of those issues as well, because I know it's publicly, again, like out of any characteristic or attribute that just seems to be completely misunderstood in general media, it is skating bases. Like everything I've seen read about this kid, elite skater, elite skating base. He does not have an elite skating base. It's very good, but there's definitely some work to be done. His internal hip rotation is kind of weak. His crossover mechanics as a result of that can let him down at times. As a lot of you know, like crossovers really matter when it comes to being able to defend off the rush correctly. So I think that might be exploited a little bit out of the gate, but once he gets comfortable, once he gets a bit stronger, a little more explosive, a little powerful, a little more everything when it comes to skating, then it's time for him to take off because he has everything. There's nothing missing. It's one of those things. Levchinov just played his first game, right, Jérôme? Just the other day. Really, didn't look out of place at all. The defense is going to hold better long term than Boom's. Right. The bet is, though, that Boom is a much more dynamic, adaptive processor of the play and can think 2 to 3 steps ahead at a rate that Levchinov can't. And then Levchinov compartmentalizes his skill set on the ice occasionally, whereas Boom can sequence and chain everything together to really break down opposing defenses. So, it's going to be an ongoing debate for a couple of years before we really know what's going to go down and materialize, how right or wrong we were when it comes to ranking the defense in that draft. But yeah, Scott, for right now, the sky is bordering the limit. It's just the skating. The skating is the only limiting factor, but it's still very good. So
he's honestly like almost like a left-handed version of, and a bigger version of Adam Fox. Like Adam Fox has everything as far as like IQ goes, offensively, vision, the skill level is really high. But sometimes Adam Fox defensively is a bit like we saw a bit of that at the Four Nation tournament. So I don't know. I don't think it's a perfect comparable, but there's some element to Fox games that are pretty similar to Bume, but he's a bit bigger than Fox. And I still think the skating is a bit better than Fox, obviously. So anyway, he's a very I'm looking forward to see, and I think overall is a better prospect than Matechuk. Anyway, I hope that answers your question for the YouTube user who sent it to us. Don't be shy, guys. Send us some question, and that can we'll answer them on some of future episodes. I don't know if we're gonna do a mailbag every week, but it's always fun for us to answer questions.
We'll definitely do a big one for the final ranking and draft coverage for sure. Though. That's when we'll go all in on. So we'll get everything from HF board questions to Twitter questions to scouts that just private messages. We'll bring them all together and collect them, because I like everything I'm reading publicly. Like, this draft's not understood correctly at all. Like, the players are not discussed properly. The draft isn't discussed properly. So we'll get on that. We'll make sure everybody understands what's going on here in the future.
All right, well, that will do it for us. We'll be back next week for another episode. So thanks everyone from watching. Thank you, Brad, for being with me again this week, and we'll talk to you guys next week for a brand new episode of Scouting Session. And take care, guys.
Take care, everybody.